amen to that. They say that the great city of Rome wasn't built in a day, wisdom that anyone can grasp, even if they've never built a thing in their lives. Those who do build know just how painfully true the saying is. Building anything well, even a simple structure, takes time and effort, and maybe even a team of willing workers. Now Jesus, a builder by trade, knew this for sure. And when faced with his biggest project ever, building the kingdom of God, he knew that he could not do it alone. That's why he commissioned 12 disciples, but of course it would take way more than that to make God's kingdom a reality on earth. It could only happen if people all over the world would work together. But you know how people are. So did Jesus. He knew all about the ways in which people could fail. Already his core 12 disciples were messing things up. He warned them in very colorful language about their attitude of exclusivity. He said, "If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea." Mark chapter 9, verse 42. They would be better off sleeping with the fishes than tripping up people who were carrying the building blocks for the kingdom of God. Even if they didn't have the right credentials, if they had the right intentions, then they are part of the kingdom. Now, Jesus could have ended the lesson here. We get it, right? Yeah, we probably do. But Jesus didn't seem to think that his listeners, his 12 first disciples, understood. They seemed unable to apply his teaching to their actual lives. So Jesus continued the lesson, directing sharp words right at the 12 hearts in front of him. He said, "If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where their worm never dies and their fire is never quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how can you season it? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another." That final point, be at peace with one another, I imagine we've got no questions about that part. We know what he means and we know why he said it. They have been arguing with each other. Be at peace with one another is a perfectly clear teaching. He meant it quite literally. But the rest of these words, I don't know anyone who would ever presume that Jesus, who went out of his way to heal the disabled and the blind, would seriously advocate for the maiming and dismembering suggested in this passage. I think we all understand that Jesus is using metaphorical language here and hyperbole, 2 rhetorical tools common among rabbis. This is the way Jesus taught, by saying things that provoked questions. This teaching, in all of its outrageousness, invited Jesus' core disciples to question, might there be some aspect of their own lives that needed to be cut off or torn out? Not literal body parts, of course, but ideas or behaviors that were causing them to stumble in their effort to work together peaceably to build this kingdom of God. When they examined their own hearts and minds, what stumbling blocks did they see? Knowing what we know about them, we can guess pride for having been singled out by Jesus, arrogance fed by the belief that they were the select few to know him, jealousy toward anyone who threatened their sense of importance, and greed for whatever lofty prize they imagined was in store for them if they followed Jesus. But he was wise enough not to feed them these answers. How would they have responded had he simply accused them of being arrogant and greedy? What would you say if someone accused you of being arrogant and greedy? My first impulse would be to deny it. No, I'm not. And my second impulse would be to defend it. It's not how it looks. I can explain. But Jesus doesn't want or need excuses for poor discipleship. He wants transformed hearts and minds, and that only comes from deep soul searching the asking of tough questions, and he knows how hard this will be, opening their minds and softening their hearts, seeing things a new way. Oh, it's almost as difficult as cutting off their hands and feet, because either way they'll have to learn a new way of living. But this new way of living, it's God's timeless, eternal will for humanity that we should live in peace, doing absolutely everything necessary so that everyone, everywhere can live well, fed by the abundance that God intended for us to share. Jesus' disciples are being called to facilitate this process, to build this kingdom of God here on earth, but oh, how many ways they could fail. If they would stumble by lifting a hand to strike down a neighbor, or if they would stick out a foot to prevent someone from reaching a goal. If their eyes should fail to see others the way God sees them as beloved. According to this passage, those stumbling blocks will launch them right into hell. Thanks in part to the morbidly imaginative art of earlier centuries and literary works like Dante's Inferno, we may hear this as a very literal condemnation to a place where the worm never dies and the fire is never quenched. And although no one to my knowledge has ever located such a place, many people assume that it's in some obscure, unmappable location that your GPS can't find, but oh, one critical misstep and you'll stumble headlong into it, this mysterious and terrifying place. That more or less what we imagine when we hear the word hell? The thing is, that's probably not what Jesus was talking about here. In this passage, the word hell has been translated from the word Gehenna in the original Greek text. And Gehenna was a place. Everyone knew where it was. It was just outside Jerusalem. You could find it if you wanted to, which you might if your spouse was nagging at you to take out the trash. Go to Gehenna was not a curse, but a honeydew. Gehenna was the place where garbage was taken to be burned, a place where the worms lived extravagantly, and the fire never went out. That place was stinky and dirty and cursed. Cursed because people knew the history of that place. Once upon a time, when God's people stumbled and began to worship other gods, they would go to Gehenna to make sacrifice to a god called Moloch. They didn't sacrifice lambs or goats or calves. They sacrificed their own children, burning babies in a furnace shaped like an idol. That place was Gehenna. The idol had been destroyed, but the memory remained. You might go there if you had to take out the garbage, but you would never want to stay there. To be thrown into such a place, to have nowhere else to go, you'd give your right hand to avoid that. And in the kingdom of God, no one should ever have to dwell in such a place, separated from the sheltering love of community. By contrast, the kingdom of God is about togetherness, welcome, and met needs. Being connected to God and the beloved community, that is life. Being separated from it is like Gehenna. And so, according to Jesus, whatever it is that might cause you to stumble away from the loving embrace of God and community, be it pride, resentment, destructive habits, you must rid yourself of those things or find yourself living in your own personal Gehenna. We can create Gehenna for ourselves, and we can also create it for others. We do. Writer Luis Alberto Urrea tells of a time when he was doing mission work among the poorest of the poor, the people living in a garbage dump near Tijuana. He tells how one day he sat down to write in his journal when a ragged man approached him to ask what he was doing. Well, it took a while to explain the concept of journaling to someone who had never learned to read or write, but once the man understood, he asked, "Will you write about me?" Urrea told him that yes, he probably would. For a moment, he wasn't sure whether the man intended to punch him or embrace him. He did neither. He just said, "Good. Tell them about me. Tell them I was born in this trash, lived in this trash, and will be buried in this trash." Gehenna is the fact that anyone has to live this way. No one's there because they like it. They're there for reasons that are extremely complicated. But in essence, it's because someone put a stumbling block into someone else's path. It may have happened generations ago, but the result is that humans are forced to subsist on the margins of a kingdom that is not aligned with God's will. And it's not only the suffering who are harmed by these conditions. Really, none of us can be entirely whole while such suffering exists. That it does is what is keeping us all from experiencing the kingdom of heaven, God's vision for all of us here on earth. We need truly wise leaders in the world who have the willingness and the determination to seek out the root causes of suffering and to address them, which obligates us to do some learning too, so that we can understand and support the best possible solutions. We cannot let lack of information become a stumbling block, or we will ensure that Gehenna is an eternal condition for many of God's children here on earth. I know it's hard. The truth will break our hearts. Broken hearts are open hearts, and hearts that refuse to break will remain closed and indifferent to the plights of others. Our hearts must be open if we are to experience the kingdom of heaven. I know it's possible because I have seen glimpses of it. More often than not, when hearts are broken open to reveal their deepest truth. I saw it recently in a cemetery at a memorial service. Now, I don't know if the person being remembered had gone to church every single Sunday of her life or recited all the creeds from memory, but I do know that she had been beloved to all who knew her because she was kind and gracious and open-hearted. At her memorial, there were tears, but also much joy. For this woman's life had created a tiny little kingdom of heaven, and her loved ones were part of it. I didn't need to quiz them on their theology to see that. After that memorial, one of the relatives had to rush off quickly. It turns that she had to leave to attend the memorial of her own father. I expressed concern for this young woman who must have been overwhelmed with grief. This is what they told me. Her father was a mean man, cruel to his children. And when, as children, they had confided to their pastor that their daddy beat them, they were told he had every right to do it. He was, after all, an important member of his church. A righteous man he was, whose own family would remember him with little joy. They'd cut ties with him years ago, and if that isn't hell, I don't know what is. I do not think he should have cut off the hand he used to beat his children, but had he been able to remove the harshness from his heart, maybe he could have avoided the Gehenna of broken relationship with his own family. I have no idea whether he will suffer for all of eternity, but I do know that he lived a miserable life and harmed the very people he was supposed to cherish. Maybe that's punishment enough. There are grave consequences to our stumbling when we fail to live according to the loving law of God. We invite suffering into our lives and the lives of others, and that is Gehenna, to feel cut off from God, from community, or even from ourselves. The alternative is the kingdom of heaven, which Jesus told his disciples to build by including everyone, even the very least of these. For it would not be built by a select few, but by everyone working together. Their biggest stumbling block would be their inability to do that. The solution was to hold on to the essence of their identity as disciples. Jesus compared this identity to salt, saying, "Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how can you season it? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another." Showing obedience to God's will by living peaceably together was not an add-on to the disciples' lives, it was the essence of their lives. It is the essence of our lives too, if we call ourselves disciples. This kingdom of God is not built by our being better than the folks across town or across the world. It is built by being at peace with the whole of creation. Let us not stumble in this work. I'd like to close with this prayer from St. Francis. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, Lord.